I'm here today to talk about one of my favourite rifles. In one of my previous videos I mentioned that the ZAR Martini made by Wesley-richards was to me a most interesting rifle, and I have two rifles today to talk about. This particular rifle is dated 1896 and it was owned by a burgher named J.C. Gerber, or Gerber you might say in the English language, G-E-R-B-E-R. What he's done is actually put the initials JG on this side of the butt, very crudely. He's also got a letter J, a single letter J, up here at the top of the fore end. And then in addition to that, if you can see just below my hand here, there's another JG for Johann Gerber. And also, interestingly, a big carving here of the name Nooit Gedacht. That's a Dutch word which translates roughly to never imagined or never thought. I suspect it means I never thought I'd have this farm, or never thought I'd own this farm. It's a fairly popular name for farms in South Africa. Nooit Gedacht you see quite frequently. As I mentioned, this guy's name was J.C. Gerber. I've never come across this before, and I've seen a lot of Boer rifles and British rifles and colonial rifles with men's names carved or engraved onto the butts or onto the receivers, etc. In this instance, Burgher Gerber has obviously got a small 3mm punch, and very lightly he's punched, what would you say, a design which is actually his name, which is J.C. Gerber. I thought at first it was a .22 shell case, but in fact it's smaller than the .22. I've measured it up to 3mm. So very difficult to see, but I'm sure you'll see on the blown up image J.C. Gerber. And as I mentioned before, he's also got a very rough JG, which in fact is upside down here. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about was, we all talk about doodling on a notepad when you're on the phone, etc., etc. I suspect that Burgher Gerber was around the campfire, and he must have been thinking what to write onto this or carve onto his rifle, because all over the stock, the fore end of the stock of this rifle, are small inscriptions of maybe 4 or 5 letters, N-O-O-I-T or N-O-O-I, some longer than others, and they're all, and the close inspection, are the word Nooit Gedacht. So we get the impression that he was trying quite a few times to write the name and wasn't quite sure where to do it, and eventually he's ended up putting Nooit Gedacht, as I said, on this side of the stock. Now, I've done some research, and from what I can find, there were only 2 men named J.C. Gerber. One was Johann Christian Gerber, and the Christian is spelled C-H-R-I-S-T-I-A-N. He was 20 years old when he was captured. He came from the farm Braamfontein in the Transvaal. He was captured in 1901 and sent to the Bellary POW camp in India. Now, there's another man, also J.C. Gerber, who is listed as a veteran. There's a League of Veterans register which was made up after the war of surviving veterans. He's given his name as Johann Christian Gerber, the only difference being 2 A's in the Christian instead of Christian. Johann Christian Gerber said that he was 20 years old, and he also says that he was captured in 1901. He then said he came from Krugersdorp, not Johannesburg, which the first guy said he was from. I strongly suspect that it's one and the same man. Krugersdorp is not that far away from Johannesburg. He could well have been displaced during the war. He might have been, his farm was probably burnt. He might have moved to Krugersdorp and enlisted himself as a veteran at that stage. So there we have it. Once again, it's living history. Here's a rifle, an interesting rifle made by the British, which was supplied to the Boer Republic of the ZAR, Paul Kruger's little republic. And a few years later, they were shooting back at the British with their own rifles. The second Wesley-richards improved Martini, something I didn't mention before, as I'm sure all of you Martini-Henry boys know. The original Martini-Henry came out in 1871. It was adopted by the British Army and became an icon of the British Army for many, many years, until it was superseded by the pattern 1888 Lee Metford. The big thing about the Wesley-richards Martini, it's got a Frankot action, but very briefly, this is a very, very neat compact action which you can actually drop out of the receiver just by removing this bolt and retaining pin. Drops out in one unit, and it's not the nightmare that a Martini-Henry usually was or initially was. Also, the cocking indicator is in a different position. It's not on the side. It comes up, it pops up at the top of the receiver there, which I'm sure you all know. One of the things which once again is very distinctive about these WR Wesley-Richards Martinis is this distinct hump at the back of the receiver. So even in old photographs of the bores in the field, you can normally pick out the ZAR Martinis versus the standard British style Martini-Henry. Now this fellow was obviously either semi-literate or totally illiterate, because there are two initials carved quite deeply into the side of the butt. They could be a C and a Z, or possibly an E and a Z, but they're not in any sort of a format. They're not in a line. They're all higgledy-piggledy. In addition to that, we've got a name on the other side of the stock here, which is very, very roughly done. At first I thought it was G.C. Bale, B-E-Y-L. I looked to see any boards that I could find with the surname Bale, and there were a few unusually, but none of them had the same initials as I believe are on here. I showed this to a few friends and people overseas, and someone came up with the idea that it was probably not Bale, but B-L-T, and you can make up your own mind about that. We also think that the initials were probably C.B. as opposed to C.G. So I looked then for a C.B. belt, but there weren't any burgers by the name of B.L.T. belt that I could find. I then looked at the British and colonial records, and lo and behold, out popped three men named Belt, B.L.T. One of them was a quartermaster sergeant, Charles B. Belt, and he served in the South Staffordshire Regiment. Now, it could have well been that he didn't have a very particularly good handwriting, but if it was him, certainly he's done a pretty rough job over here with inscribing his name. I'll let you be the final judgment as to what that name may be. But having seen this unusual and very scruffy initial on the one side and a very untidy and rough carving on this side of the stock, conversely, there's a very, very artistic version of the ZAR coat of arms on the right hand side of the butt, which I'm sure you can see there, and we'll bring it up, zoom it up slightly. There are quite a few variations that I've seen over the years of rifles with the ZAR coat of arms. They're all variations of a theme. I've got 4 or 5 in my own collection. I think that this one is a particularly nice one. At the bottom of the coat of arms is the motto, Eendracht maakt macht. That means basically unity makes strength. When the two Boer republics and the Cape Colony and Natal, the British colonies, were all united in 1910 to become the Union of South Africa as a Commonwealth country, they adopted this very same motto, unity is strength. So there we have it, ZAR Martini, another one, once again, with probably not a very clear story, but certainly a man's name on there, and a very good representation of the ZAR coat of arms. I hope you've enjoyed the story about these two lovely ZAR Martinis. Thank you.